Hello dear friends. Welcome to the InStyle Knitting Studio. Before starting any knitting project, everyone wonders, how many stitches should I cast on? To find out, you need to know your knitting gauge. Knitting gauge is the number of stitches and rows in 1 or 10 centimeters of your knitted fabric. Each person has their own knitting gauge. Suppose you use the same yarn and needle or hook size as I do, it's not certain we'll have the same number of stitches or rows in the knitted fabric. Therefore, you should always knit a swatch before any project. You should knit it with the same yarn and the same needle or hook size you plan to use for your project. I advise making the swatch larger than 10 by 10 centimeters. It means not being lazy and knitting a swatch, so you won't have to undo your projects later. Because if you knit a small swatch, it will be unreliable, there will be significant errors in the calculations. Now, I will show two of the simplest methods for calculating your knitting gauge. Probably the simplest and most common method is this. Suppose I've knitted a swatch. The swatch should be a little larger than 10 by 10 centimeters. Mine is larger in this case. I also forgot to mention that after knitting the swatch, it's best to wash and dry it on a flat surface, many I know. Steam it because after wet processing the fabric can behave differently. It might stretch a bit, or it might shrink. And you also need to consider the pattern. For example, a 2 by 2 ribbing compresses the fabric. Accordingly, you will need to cast on more stitches than, say, when knitting in stockinette stitch. In general, we knitted, washed, and dried the swatch. After that, it's better to use a ruler rather than a measuring tape. A ruler is rigid and straightens the fabric. Suppose I want to knit a hat. I know that when I knit the hat, the ribbing will stretch a bit. Therefore, when measuring our knitting gauge, we also stretch the fabric slightly. And measure meaning, we measure the width of our swatch from start to finish. Mine turned out to be 11.5 centimeters. Now we will do the calculations. So, we are currently considering the first method, and I noted that we will calculate the width and height separately. Let's focus on the width. Here I usually write for myself like this. In one column, I write the stitches, and in the second column centimeters. We calculated that I have 11.5 centimeters for the width of my sample, and I cast on 21 stitches, right here. It is written as 21. Now let's calculate. For instance, we are knitting a hat, and we need to get the number of stitches for a head circumference of 55. I write under centimeters. 55 centimeters, that is the head circumference. And this is my X value. How do I find the number of stitches needed for my head circumference? Here, we simply solve the proportion. We visually draw a cross for ourselves and multiply, so we drew the cross like this. Here, we have two known quantities. We multiply them together. X equals 21. The stitch is multiplied by 55 centimeters. and we divide everything by the remaining one. Our known quantity is 11.5 centimeters. And that equals 100.43 hundredths of a stitch. I usually do not round. Here we found the value of x, and x is the number of stitches needed to get 55 centimeters. To knit a hat with a head circumference of 55 centimeters, you need to cast on 100 stitches. Now in the same way, you can calculate how many stitches we have in 1 centimeter or in some other number of centimeters. That is, not 55 for instance, head circumference, but more or less. Thus, this number can be replaced with any other. I will, for example, replace it with 1. That is, I will calculate how many stitches I have in 1 centimeter. We act the same way. X equals crosswise, we cross it out. And where we have known numbers on both sides, we multiply them. Then we divide by the third known value. So, 21 multiplied by 1, 21 stitches, multiplied by 1 centimeter, and divided by the remaining value, 11.5 centimeters. .83 stitches. That is, we have 1.83 stitches in 1 centimeter. We can switch these columns around. That is, here are centimeters, here are stitches. In principle, nothing will change from this. That's it, we found everything that we need. Now we will calculate the height. The height is calculated the same way. We measure our sample. My height also turned out to be 11.5 centimeters. In height, we act the same way. We also write in one column. Only now it's not stitches since this is height, but rows. Here I will write rows, and here centimeters. So we measured our sample, and my height turned out to be 11.5 centimeters. Therefore, I write here 11.5 centimeters. I knitted. I calculated 29 rows. That is, I write rows here. Next, we proceed similarly. Let's say we need the height of the hat to be 21 centimeters. I write here 21 centimeters. And how many rows will this take me? This is X. Here, it is essential to measure based on the sample of exactly the pattern we want for the hat. So, I take the height as 21 centimeters. Therefore, I will knit the entire hat in ribbing, because different patterns may have different densities. So, if I want to get a hat with a height of 21 centimeters, it will be X rows. I don't know yet how many rows I need to knit, but I know the height that I want to achieve. Next, we also see that X equals 29 multiplied by 21, 29 rows multiplied by 21 centimeters, and we divide that by 11.5. This results in 52.96 rows. That's about 53 rows, actually. To achieve this height, and here we will also calculate how many rows we have in 1 centimeter. So instead of 21, I will now use 1. X equals 29 rows, multiplied by 1 centimeter, and divided by 11.5 centimeters. This results in 2.52 rows. Thus, I have 2.5 rows for 1 centimeter. This is how I usually calculate my knitting density. This is the first method. The second method may be simpler. Here I have also separately noted the width and height. We will also highlight 2 columns here, stitches and centimeters. We will now calculate on our sample how many stitches we have in 10 centimeters. We spread our sample out, stretching it as we want the ribbing to be. It will stretch, as I mentioned, and we place the ruler in the middle of our sample. We will measure 10 centimeters, not from the edge but rather taking the middle to be more accurate. So here is the start of my ruler and 10 centimeters. And here we count how many stitches are in 10 centimeters. I counted and I got 18 stitches. There are 18 stitches in 10 centimeters. Next, we will calculate how many stitches there are in 1 centimeter. This is elementary. In 1 centimeter, it comes out to 1.8 stitches. So you can also use proportion if it's difficult for you. That is, 18 needs to be divided by 10. It will be 1.8. That's it. We have obtained the number of stitches per 1 centimeter. And for example, again, we need the width to be 55 centimeters. We take 55 centimeters. For example, the circumference of the head in the hat multiplied by 1.8 stitches. That is the number of stitches in 1 centimeter. That comes out to 99 stitches. I have it calculated. So, to knit a hat with a head circumference of 55 centimeters, I need to cast on 99 stitches. The same goes for the height we measure. We also take a sample and place it 10 centimeters in the middle of the sample. That is, not from the edge, but in the middle, so that the stitches lie evenly, and we can calculate more accurately. Here it measures from this point to 10 centimeters. We count how many rows we have knitted. Here is the height. We also write the rows here. Just like here, and the second column is centimeters. We counted how many rows we knitted for 10 centimeters in height. I counted that I have knitted 26 rows. Accordingly, in 1 centimeter, there are 2.6 rows. That's it. And again, if, for instance, we need the height of the hat to be 21 centimeters, we take 21 centimeters. Multiply by the number of rows in 1 centimeter, we multiply by 2.6 rows and get 54.6 rows. That's it. That was the second method. Depending on what is easier for someone, what is faster. But to be honest, for some reason, I use the first method. Now let's compare our two methods and the data we obtained from the first and the second. For example, we took a head circumference of 55 centimeters, and I find that for 55 centimeters, I need to cast on 100 stitches. Here for 55 centimeters in the second case, I need to cast on 99 stitches. In principle, the difference of 1 stitch is not much. That is, the margin of error is small. In 1 centimeter, I have 1.8 stitches, and here in 1 centimeter, 1.83, almost the same, in height. It is the same. In the first case, to get a height of 21 centimeters, I need to knit 53 rows. Here, in the second case, I need to knit 54, even 55 rows. 53, 55. Here, there is a slight. The discrepancies are small, but I would say not very significant. In the first case, I need to gain 2.5 rows for every 1 centimeter. In the second case, 2.6 rows, but it is almost the same situation. Well, as we can see, there are minor discrepancies and errors, but in knitting, these few millimeters seem entirely unnoticeable to me. There is nothing scary about this. That is all I have told you. Regarding how I determine my gauge, sometimes I use the first method. Sometimes I use the second method. I hope, after this lesson, you will not have any questions about how many stitches I need to cast on, if I am knitting with this or that yarn, with this or that hook or needles. So, Happy knitting to you, and see you soon, friends.